Questions orales, oral questions. Honorable chef de l'opposition.
Monsieur le Président, tous les yeux de la planète sont tournés présentement vers Bruxelles en Belgique, alors que nos amis et alliés sont victimes d'une attaque terroriste. Nos pensées et nos prières sont avec les victimes et leurs familles. Le Premier ministre peut-il donner une mise à jour aux Canadiens sur les derniers développements en Belgique et nous préciser si des Canadiens ont été impliqués dans cette attaque terroriste?
L'honorable ministre des Affaires étrangères.
Je voudrais remercier la chef d'opposition pour ses paroles si dignes et si vraies. Et je suis sûr que je peux m'associer avec tous mes collègues de cette Chambre en exprimant en ce moment la solidarité absolue de tous les Canadiens envers le peuple belge et notre détermination qui ne fera que se renforcer à chaque fois qu'il y aura une attaque terroriste de ce genre à vaincre le terrorisme. Le terrorisme est une voie sans issue, ça ne peut pas réussir. Nous allons combattre le terrorisme et aujourd'hui on le fera avec le peuple belge.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, on that note, during the election campaign, the Prime Minister and the Liberal Party campaigned to get rid of certain anti-terrorist measures that the Conservatives brought in to disrupt and prevent terrorist networks. Our security forces have now said that they've used these tools successfully to disrupt terrorist activity here in Canada. So will the Prime Minister reverse his position and ensure that we maintain these tools so our security forces can keep Canadians safe from terrorism?
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, during the election campaign, the commitment was very clear that we would do everything in our power to make sure that our security and police services were effective in keeping Canadians safe, and at the same time, the Canadian values, rights, and freedoms were thoroughly and properly respected. There is no contradiction between those two positions.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Mindapore.
Mr. Speaker, the genocidal death cult of ISIL has claimed responsibility for today's terrible attacks in Brussels, leading the French President Hollande to say that Europe is at war with ISIS. My question is, Canada also at war with ISIS? And if so, why did we end our combat operations against that terrorist organization?
The Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, we have made this debate, and I think it has been very clearly expressed that we may have different views about how optimally fight this awful Islamic State. And we concluded that the best way was to triple our effort for training, double our intelligence service, strengthen our development aid, to extend our effort to not only Syria and Iraq, but also Lebanon and Jordan, and that is well received by the coalition, and today is not a day to make politics about that.
I have a member for Calgary-Mindapore.
I hope the minister is not suggesting that President Hollande was making politics in stating that Europe is at war with ISIS. Now, Mr. Speaker, ISIS is also engaged in a campaign to eradicate the ancient indigenous peoples of Mesopotamia, the Assyrian Yazidis, and other people. The previous Conservative government recognized this as a form of genocide, which was followed, an example followed by the EU Parliament, the US Congress, the Obama administration. So, Mr. Speaker, why has this Liberal government reversed Canada's position recognizing the genocide of ISIS against the indigenous peoples of Mesopotamia?
The Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
I'm very sorry to say to my colleague that the former government did not recognize a genocide with the action of the Islamic State. They did not rush to this decision. As I speak today, Canada recognized 5 genocides over the world, in the history of the world, 5 genocides. If we have to recognize a 6th one, it will be done properly with the view of the international organizations appropriate for that. And I remind him that this is the view also of the United States, of the EU, and also of the United Nations. And our fight against ISIL has nothing to do with this debate about the definition.
The honourable member for Calgary-Midnapore.
Mr. Speaker, as a member of the former government, I assure the minister that he is mistaken, that I and other ministers did recognize the genocidal nature of what is happening. The 5 genocides to which he refers were recognized by motions of this House. We are asking this government, as an executive action, to recognize this reality. Monsieur le Président, le Parlement européen, le Congrès américain, l'administration Obama l'ont fait. Alors pourquoi est-ce que ce gouvernement libéral a renversé la position du Canada? Pourquoi est-ce qu'il nie le génocide actuel de ces peuples de le Moyen-Orient, Monsieur le Président?
The honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, our determination to fight terrorism is very strong anyway, but the decision to call a genocide is not only a declaration by a minister that the minister may have done. His government did not do it. If he had not have done it, it would be an act somewhere. We would know it. It's not a declaration that has been made by the minister that is sufficient to do so. And Secretary Kerry said that we need to do additional research on it and to work with the international bodies. And it's what Canada is asking for, and it's what we are asking for, Mr. Speaker.
Order. Honorable député d'Outremont.
Président, après avoir passé la campagne électorale à promettre mer et monde aux Canadiens, les libéraux, à quelques heures du budget, ont commencé à baisser les énormes attentes qu'ils ont eux-mêmes créées auprès de la population. Le Premier ministre peut-il confirmer qu'il va respecter tous ses engagements solennels pris envers les Canadiens lors de la dernière campagne électorale?
The honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Speaker, during the campaign, there was 2 clear visions that were presented to Canadians. One based on growth, investments, and jobs. The other one, supported by this member, was based on balanced budgets, massive cuts, and job losses. Canadians supported our growth agenda, and that growth agenda speaks to historic investments in infrastructure, reducing the tax burden for middle-class Canadians, helping enhance the Canada Child benefit that will help hundreds of thousands of people out of poverty, Mr. Speaker. We have a plan, we've made those commitments, and I'm confident the Minister of Finance will be presenting that in the budget very shortly.
The honourable member for Outremont.
Mr. Speaker, with just hours until their first budget, the Liberal government has been leaking like previous Liberal governments. And all the leaks point to the same thing. The Liberal budget will not include many of their campaign promises. We know the minister is legally bound not to share the contents of his budget. But can he simply tell Canadians which of their campaign promises won't be in the budget?
The honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Mr. Speaker, we have a plan to grow the economy, to create an environment for businesses and people to succeed. That's why we're making these historic investments. And all these commitments during the campaign that we made were well received by the Canadian public, and they've been discussed extensively by our government. And I'm confident in the Minister of Finance and our Prime Minister and our government to make sure that we execute our platform commitments to grow the economy, create jobs from coast to coast to coast.
From the heart out. Federal infrastructure money flowed to Saskatchewan for the global transportation hub, where there are serious allegations of massive overspending on shady land purchases that benefited the ruling party's bagmen. When asked yesterday if he will look into whether federal tax dollars were wasted, the Treasury Board president was arrogant and dismissive. So let's try again. Why is the Liberal government protecting the Saskatchewan Party?
The Honourable President of the Treasury Board.
Mr. Speaker, I was asked this question a couple of weeks ago, and in fact, I spoke with Cabinet colleagues earnestly in order to determine what the federal role would be today in this issue. And the reality is, it's a provincial issue. Now, I know the honourable member has some experience in provincial politics, and I remind him that now he's in federal politics, and he ought to stick to federal politics, particularly during electoral periods provincially. On this side of the House, we will not interfere in provincial elections.
Order. Members are obviously... Order. Order. Members are excited today, I know. Order. The honourable member for Outremont.
In fact, Mr. Speaker, it is federal government money. The Infrastructure Minister's office announced just last month that Saskatchewan will get millions more in fast-track federal infrastructure spending. So, despite the fact that the Treasury Board President claims it's not a problem, actually it is a federal issue, and the people in Saskatchewan want to know what happened to the money spent by Ottawa in Saskatchewan. So, will the government immediately call in the RCMP to look at how Canadian tax dollars were spent in the global transportation hub land scam?
Here, here.
The Honourable Minister of Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, we are proud to say that we are making historical investments into infrastructure to support municipalities, to support provinces, and we will continue to work with all provinces, and we respect the local autonomy and we respect the local decision-making process, and that's how we do business here, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah. The Honourable Member for Thornhill.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Liberals cited Canada's membership in the International Criminal Court to excuse its reluctance to join our allies in characterizing the barbaric actions of ISIS as genocide. Now, there's a specific international definition of genocide. The European Union, the United States, and the Vatican recognize that definition and explicitly accuse ISIS of genocide. Why are the Liberals so reluctant to do the same?
Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Well, I want to quote what the Secretary Curry has said, to be sure that my colleagues understand that to decide if atrocities, awful atrocities, is a genocide, it's something that must be done according to a process that is not only a declaration from a minister. It's not enough to say that the former government recognized it as a genocide only because one minister may have made a declaration. So, Mr. Speaker, I don't have the time to give the quote, but it's clearly the case that if I have other questions, I will do so. Just want to say that today is a day to think about these atrocities and to be shoulder to shoulder with our friends of Belgium.
The Honourable Member for Thornhill.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that's unacceptable. Genocide is a crime in Canada, and we incorporate the international law definition of genocide. A year ago, the Office of the United Nations High Commission for Human Rights concluded there is evidence of war crimes, of crimes against humanity, and genocide. Since then, ISIS has done nothing but continue its deliberate slaughter and extermination of those who oppose it. Again, why are the Liberals so afraid to call this genocide?
Minister of Foreign Affairs.
So this is the quote of Secretary Kerry that may be my quote also. Each of these words I support. Ultimately, the full facts must be brought to light by an independent investigation and through formal legal determination made by a competent court or tribunal. But the United States and Canada will strongly support efforts to collect, document, preserve, and analyze the evidence of atrocities, and will do all we can to see that the perpetrators are held accountable. Well said, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Selkirk Interlake Eastman.
Mr. Speaker, our thoughts and prayers are with the families and the victims of the horrific terrorist attack by ISIS in Brussels this morning. It's another tragic reminder of the extreme danger posed by terrorism. The Liberals continue to ignore the threat of terrorism, and in fact, one of their very first pieces of legislation was to return Canadian citizenship for convicted terrorists. I'd like to remind the Liberals that a terrorist is a terrorist is a terrorist. Why won't the Prime Minister take the fight against terror seriously and put Canada back in the combat mission against ISIS?
Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, thank the honourable member for the question. I think we can agree that we all agree on defeating ISIL, and we just have different opinion how it's going to be done. I took the time to talk to the troops, talk to the commanders on the ground, and making sure, and I do have actually considerable experience in fighting the enemy and having done it myself. So I'm going to make sure that that any future threats that we face, we'll be working with our coalition partners and making sure that our aim remains the same, which is to defeat ISIL. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Selkirk Interlake Eastman.
But, Mr. Speaker, we're not in combat. We're now just trainers. Mr. Speaker, last week the American government condemned the action of ISIS as genocide. Rather than working with our allies to destroy this barbaric terrorist group, our Prime Minister has taken Canada out of the fight. The Liberals are ignoring Canada's responsibility to protect the most vulnerable citizens who are targeted by ISIS. So why is the Prime Minister afraid to fight terrorism head-on and stop the ISIS genocide?
The Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
I think, Mr. Speaker, this question is simply shameful. I think everybody knows that every member in this House is fighting terrorism. No Canadian that is being chosen by the Canadian people is afraid to fight terrorism. We may have democratic difference of views about how to fight it. I would like my colleague to hear what the leader of the opposition has said when she asked her question. It was very dignified, but this one was not.
Honorable député de Charlebourg, Haute-Saint-Charles.
Monsieur le Président, durant la campagne électorale, le Premier ministre s'est moqué des positions conservatrices concernant le terrorisme. Suite aux attentats de ce matin, le ministre des Affaires étrangères a déclaré, et je cite, « Entendre des cris d'enfants dans la fumée du métro de Bruxelles ne fait que renforcer notre détermination à combattre le terrorisme sous toutes ses formes. » Est-ce que le Premier ministre est d'accord avec son ministre des Affaires étrangères et que fera-t-il pour combattre cette menace au Canada?
The Minister of Public Safety.
Speaker, here at home, the Canadian police services and security services are vigilantly doing their job every day. Obviously, on a day like this one, they redouble their efforts to ensure that Canadians are safe. They have examined the threat level in this country, as they do on a continuous basis, and they have determined to this point in time there is no reason for adjusting that threat level. It remains at medium, where it was since October of 2014.
Honorable député de Charlebourg, Haute-Saint-Charles.
Monsieur le Président, le terrorisme menace constamment l'Occident. Après l'attentat de Toronto dans un centre de recrutement des forces canadiennes, nous avons constaté que nos militaires n'étaient pas adéquatement protégés. Monsieur le Président, quelles sont les mesures concrètes prises par ce gouvernement pour assurer la protection des bases militaires du Canada et son personnel?
Honorable Minister of National Defense.
Speaker, regrettably, I was actually in the Ukrainian Poland visiting our troops during the attack campaign, and my first place what I went to was actually to visit the recruiting center. And I was briefed personally that the measures were taken from incidents in the past, and I got to see the measures, and the actions that were taken are actually quite commendable in how they were able to take down the perpetrator. When it comes to threats and force protection, it's an ongoing situation, and we adjust accordingly. But for obvious reasons, we don't make it public. Thank you very much.
Honorable député de Berthier-Masquinanger.
Monsieur le Président, les inspecteurs de l'Agence canadienne d'inspection des aliments lancent un cri d'alarme. Après des années et des années de compression massive, l'Agence n'est plus en mesure de jouer son rôle. Il y a l'urgence d'agir aujourd'hui parce que c'est la santé des Canadiens qui est en jeu. Le NPD demande depuis des années qu'on évalue les impacts négatifs des compressions conservatrices et qu'on réinvestisse dans le système d'inspection des aliments. Monsieur le Président, est-ce que le gouvernement peut nous dire quel est son plan pour assurer la sécurité alimentaire des Canadiens aujourd'hui?
Honorable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, our government is committed to ensuring the safety of food for all Canadians. I have been meeting on a regular basis with my colleagues in the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. The honourable member opposite may be aware that our government ran on a campaign to increase our investments in food safety. We are expecting the announcement of a budget imminently, and we look forward to announcing further measures that we will undertake to ensure the safety of the food for all Canadians.
The honourable member for Vancouver-Kingsway.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians deserve to know that their food is safe, and they deserve to know that now, not years from now. Mr. Speaker, 71% of Canada's meat inspectors report that staffing levels are now so low they cannot adequately ensure the safety of the products on Canadians' tables. Now, the Liberals promised to reverse the Conservative cuts to food inspections. Will the government act immediately before we have another food safety disaster that endangers the health and safety of Canadian families.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I have already announced that we will be making further investments in the safety of food. On the matter of inspectors, whether it's for federal staff or industry staff, a food safety inspector is on the ground at all times in every federally registered plant in Canada. The CFIA continues to ensure that all required tasks are met at every establishment. I have absolute trust in the professionalism of my colleagues in the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, and we look forward to further supporting them with appropriate measures.
The Honourable Member for Brantford Brant.
Mr. Speaker, Deficit Day has finally arrived. The Liberals promised they would borrow $10 billion this year. They broke that promise. The Finance Minister claimed he would balance the books by 2019. He quit on that one too. He then promised the debt to GDP ratio wouldn't go up, and he can't even hit that target. Given all these broken promises, why should Canadians believe anything presented in this budget?
Honourable Secretary for Finance.
I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for his question, but let me be clear once again, we will take no advice from the Conservative when it comes to deficit, Mr. Speaker. Today is a great day, Mr. Speaker. As we went, the Minister in Finance and I, across this nation, we listened from Canadians from coast to coast to coast. Canadians have asked us invest in family, invest in Canadians, invest in growth. Mr. Speaker, the only ones who don't understand that seems to be these people, because the Conservative left us with deficit. What the agency are saying, the IMF is saying, when interests are low, you should invest in the economy. That's what the OCDE says, Mr. Speaker. That's exactly.
Honourable Member for Brantford Brant.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, spending borrowed money on pet Liberal projects is not a jobs plan. The Finance Minister has been all over the map. He's abandoning his campaign budget promises, his spending targets keep changing, and he's constantly floating new ideas to raise taxes on businesses. Private sector investment has fallen off a cliff since this Finance Minister arrived. What is the plan to get businesses, not government, businesses, investing in our economy again?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for his question. As I said, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance and I, we went from coast to coast to coast. Mr. Speaker, we did something that the Conservative never did. We listened to Canadians. And what Canadians have been telling us, Mr. Speaker, is invest in the economy now, invest in growth. And you know, Mr. Speaker, in just about an hour, that's exactly what we're going to present to Canadians.
Honorable député de Portneuf, Jacques Cartier.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. On ne sent pas de la part de ce gouvernement un intérêt marqué pour le développement économique de nos régions. Par exemple, dans mon comté, dis-je, le quai de Portneuf, à plus de 20 reprises, j'ai tenté d'avoir une mise à jour du cabinet du ministre des Transports pour répondre aux gens impliqués dans ce dossier. Aucune réponse. Ça confirme que ce gouvernement n'a pas de plan. Dans son budget, est-ce que le ministre des Finances va mettre des conditions gagnantes, telles des allègements fiscaux, pour inciter nos commettants à faire prospérer nos régions?
Honorable secrétaire parlementaire des Finances.
Monsieur le Président, je voudrais remercier mon honorable collègue pour sa question. Comme je disais, Monsieur le Président, effectivement, le ministre des Finances et moi-même, nous sommes allés dans toutes les régions du Canada. Nous avons entendu les Canadiens de toutes les parties du Canada, Monsieur le Président. Ce que nous allons présenter plus tard aujourd'hui, je sais que mon honorable collègue est anxieux d'entendre le prochain budget. Il a juste à attendre encore une heure. On va présenter exactement notre plan pour les Canadiens. Un plan qui fait de la croissance économique, un plan qui investit dans les Canadiens, un plan qui investit dans la croissance, Monsieur le Président.
Honorable député de Portneuf, Jacques Cartier.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Les libéraux prévoient emprunter beaucoup d'argent. Il ne faut pas dépenser de l'argent qu'on n'a pas. Il faut redevenir un leader économique comme sous l'ancien gouvernement. Nos entreprises n'ont pas à subir une lourdeur administrative ni une augmentation de taxes et d'impôts. Ce gouvernement doit créer de l'emploi sans gaspiller les deniers publics ni refiler la facture aux Canadiens. Le ministre des Finances s'engage-t-il à mettre les moyens nécessaires pour que nos entreprises puissent croire en l'avenir économique de notre pays?
Honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
Monsieur le Président, je voudrais remercier mon honorable collègue pour sa question. Monsieur le Président, il semble être le seul qui ne comprend pas, Monsieur le Président. Les Canadiens et les Canadiennes comprennent que quand les taux d'intérêt sont bas, c'est exactement le temps d'investir dans l'économie. C'est ce que l'OCDE dit, Monsieur le Président, c'est ce que le Fonds monétaire international dit. Investissez dans l'économie. Nous avons la dette, le ratio de la dette sur le PIB le plus bas dans le G7. Monsieur le Président, c'est le temps d'investir et c'est ce que nous allons faire et c'est ce que les Canadiens et les Canadiennes nous ont demandé de faire, Monsieur le Président. Merci.
Honorable député de Sherbrooke.
Monsieur le Président, des Canadiens fortunés s'achètent des yachts et des voiliers en ne payant aucune taxe. Ces privilégiés utilisent un stratagème qui leur permet de traverser les douanes en toute impunité et sans jamais payer leur dû. Parmi eux, il y aurait le sous-ministre de la Sécurité publique, responsable des services frontaliers, qui se serait lui-même assuré que la combine puisse continuer. Libéraux, bateaux, paradis fiscaux, ça vous rappelle quelque chose? Le gouvernement va-t-il mettre fin à ce stratagème, premièrement, et surtout faire enquête sur le sous-ministre de la Sécurité publique?
Honorable ministre, Sécurité publique.
Mr. Speaker, the Deputy Minister has engaged with the Ethics Commissioner on this file, and she will provide any advice that is necessary with respect to tax policy and the taxation rules that are applicable to particular transactions. That's within the purview of the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Revenue.
The member for New Westminster, Burnaby.
Here's another Liberal broken promise. The Conservatives signed a deal to implement FATCA and hand over private financial information of 1 million Canadians to the United States. During the campaign, the Liberals said the deal violates privacy rights and may even be unconstitutional. But now in government, they've handed over private information on more than 155,000 Canadians so far, without even understanding the impact. So how can this government be so careless with its promises and so careless with the privacy rights of up to 1 million Canadians?
Honorable ministre, Revenu national.
Notre gouvernement prend très au sérieux la question de la protection de la vie privée. Nous continuerons à travailler avec les États-Unis pour veiller à ce que toutes les garanties de sécurité soient respectées. Nous tenons à rappeler que nos deux pays ont une longue tradition de coopération fiscale et responsable qui remonte à 1942. Et je voudrais rassurer les Canadiens, tous les échanges d'informations avec les États-Unis, avec le respect aux droits de la vie privée en vigueur au Canada, sont cohérents.
The honourable member for Surrey Centre.
Mr. Speaker, many of my constituents and people across British Columbia continue to be concerned for the well-being of the people of Fiji and who had been hit by Cyclone Winston. Mr. Speaker, as many as 32,000 homes have been damaged or destroyed and 350,000 people have been displaced as a result of this devastating natural disaster. Can the Minister of International Development inform the House on the additional steps this government has taken to help the people suffering from the lasting damages of this storm?
Honourable Minister of International Development.
Mr. President, I would like to thank my colleague for his implication in Canada's response to Cyclone Winston. After initial support of basic supplies for 5,000 Fijian, our government has made additional contributions to the Red Cross and to UNICEF of $1 million to improve health, food and education of 350,000 people affected by the cyclone, including 120,000 children. We continue to assess the situation and ongoing needs.
The honourable member for Elgin, Middlesex, London.
Mr. Speaker, Benjamin Bergen was the campaign manager and the executive assistant to the current Minister of International Trade. Now he has a new job as a lobbyist. How did he get this job? By stating he has an extensive network among senior public sector officials that would be a benefit to their organization. Clearly, he is not counting on his connection with the minister to get ahead. How will the Prime Minister address the growing problem of insiders getting special access to their Liberal ministers?
The Honourable Minister of International Trade.
Mr. Speaker, once again, and for the second time in 2 days, the members opposite are looking for stories where there are none. I will repeat, Ben worked in my constituency office and never worked in my ministerial office. It is his role to check with the ethics office, which he is doing and has done. But I do want to emphasize an important thing. I have met with innovators and entrepreneurs from across the country in the past. I will continue to do so, and I am proud to be doing it.
Here, here. The honourable member for Elgin, Middlesex, London. Again.
You know, we obviously have a very, very busy ethics commissioner working right now. We see a pattern of unethical behaviour by the Liberals. While the Minister of International Trade brushes aside her relationship with Benjamin Bergen, she cannot deny that their relationship was helped him get the position he currently holds. In fact, Mr. Bergen is openly bragging about his extensive connections with senior public officials. The only reason he now has his position is because of his blatant conflict of interest. Does the Prime Minister intend to just sit idle while Liberal insiders continue to enjoy special access to the Liberal ministers?
The Minister of International Trade.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know if something is wrong with the hearing on the other side of the House, but I think that I'm just going to have to repeat myself. So, as I said, Ben Bergen worked in my constituency office. He never worked for me in my ministerial capacity. And I really want to underscore for any Canadian innovators and entrepreneurs who are listening today, I am proud to have met with in the past many Canadian innovators and entrepreneurs. I will continue to do so. That is my job as Minister of International Trade.
Here, here. The honourable member for Sarnia Lambton.
Mr. Speaker, the Conflict of Interest Code states that we're prohibited from using our position to further another person or entity's private interests. The Justice Minister previously protested against the Site C Dam project, and now the Minister is on Cabinet who will decide whether this project will go forward or not. That will certainly further her previous entity's interests. Will the Minister do the right thing and remove herself from all Cabinet discussion about the Site C Dam project?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, what we've said over and over again in the House is that the Minister of Justice and all ministers, and in fact all reporting public office holders, will be governed at all times by their responsibility in the Conflict of Interest Act and the code that applies to members of Parliament. We take our advice on these issues from the independent Ethics Commissioner, and we will always follow that advice, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Sarnia Lambton.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and so I went to the page of the Ethics Commissioner, and the Ethics Commissioner stated the Justice Minister can no longer perform some of her duties because of a conflict of interest. That's due to her husband lobbying the Liberals. Now we have the Site C Dam decision, which places her in another conflict. So my question is, the Minister of Justice going to establish yet another ethical screen to deal with this conflict as well?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, the member does no service to members of this House or anyone in public life by making a series of false allegations. The Ethics Commissioner at no time, Mr. Speaker, has made reference to the Site C Dam and any imagined conflict of interest that the member opposite is making up. So, Mr. Speaker, if she had the courage of her convictions, she'd step outside. There are a lot of cameras there today, and she should feel free to make that same allegation outside.
The honourable member for North Island, Powell River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, the member of New Westminster Burnaby and I visited the Comox Marine Communications Centre, where staff shared their concerns about the impending closure. We are very worried too. This month, the Fisheries Committee heard recorded evidence of the poor quality of the so-called new technology that the minister claims will replace life-saving search and rescue capacity. Will the minister see reason, abandon the foolhardy Conservative plan, and commit to keeping the Comox MCTS station open?
Honourable Secretary Parlementaire des Pêches.
Mr. Speaker, we welcome the study by the Parliamentary Committee and will listen to concerns being expressed. Centres across Canada, again, are equipped with radio communication technology that was regularly tested and safe. The Canadian Coast Guard analyzed the recording of the garbled message presented to the committee on March 10. This transmission reflects some of the very earliest problems experienced in 2013 with the new communication software, Mr. President. Mr. President, the new technology is working. You know, when something is old, Mr. President, we need to change it, and I think this is the right choice with the new centre. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Windsor-Tecumseh.
Mr. Speaker, recent events in Honduras are of grave concern. Berta Caceres and Nelson Garcia, 2 Indigenous, environmental, and human rights activists, have been assassinated. As a result, the Dutch Development Bank and the Finnish Investment Fund suspended all activity in Honduras. Will this government condemn these murders and call on the Honduran government to hold an independent international investigation?
Here. The Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my colleague to give me a possibility to reiterate what we have said. We call the government of Honduras to respect the human rights, and in this specific case, to do the right thing. It's completely unacceptable what happened, and Canada is there to protect the victims of these unacceptable gestures.
Honorable député de Lévis-Lobinière.
Monsieur le Président, le nouveau conseiller politique auprès du ministre des Affaires étrangères, M. Jocelyn Coulon, a déjà affirmé que l'OTAN amplifie la menace russe en Ukraine et en Europe dans le seul but d'augmenter les budgets militaires des pays membres. Il a écrit « Tous les documents sont bons pour alimenter cette campagne de réarmement, même des plus stupides ». Monsieur le Président, le ministre est-il d'accord avec son conseiller politique que la menace que pose la Russie, entre autres envers l'Ukraine, n'est pas si sérieuse et elle n'est qu'un prétexte pour augmenter les budgets militaires de l'Alliance?
Honorable ministre des Affaires étrangères.
Je vais laisser mon collègue à ses interprétations, Monsieur le Président, mais les faits sont là. Le Canada vient de renforcer ses sanctions contre la Russie. Nous le faisons en solidarité avec l'Ukraine et aussi de concert avec nos alliés. Au lieu d'agir seul et d'être le seul à avoir la politique de la chaise vide face à la Russie, on va engager nos relations avec la Russie de façon à parler très fort pour l'Ukraine et pour la paix dans la région.
Bravo. The Honourable Member for Niagara West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Foreign Affairs. In light of the many and frequent jihadi attacks throughout Europe, including today in Brussels, does the Minister agree with a senior policy and political advisor, Joël Couillard, who says the threat of ISIS is, quote, without a doubt, greatly exaggerated?
The Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, today is certainly a day to say that the threat against terrorism is a terrible danger, and humanity, all the human civilization, should be all together to fight terrorism. And today, the people of Canada is shoulder to shoulder with the people of Belgium.
Honorable député de Montmagny, Lillette, Kamouraska, Rivière-du-Loup.
Monsieur le Président, le conseiller du ministère des Affaires étrangères n'a pas seulement accusé l'OTAN d'amplifier des menaces qui sont pourtant réelles en Ukraine. Il a également invité Israël à tendre la main à l'Iran, ce même pays qui pourtant prône la destruction du seul État démocratique au Moyen-Orient. Est-ce que le ministre peut nous dire si, lors de ses échanges avec ses homologues israéliens, il leur conseille de se rapprocher sans condition d'un pays qui menace de sa disparition?
Honorable ministre des Affaires étrangères.
Monsieur le Président, encore une fois, je laisserai mes collègues et leurs interprétations tordues. Mais une chose est certaine, c'est que le Canada est un ami d'Israël. Ce n'était pas bien servir Israël que de couper tous les liens avec l'Iran et d'utiliser l'ambassade d'Italie pour maintenir des liens avec l'Iran. C'était incohérent comme politique. Nous avons mis fin à cette incohérence. Mais une chose à laquelle on ne mettra jamais fin, c'est notre support pour Israël et notre détermination à exiger les sanctions quand l'Iran se comporte de façon inappropriée.
Honorable député de Louis-Hébert.
Monsieur le Président, soutenir la science et la recherche se doit d'être un des piliers de la stratégie du gouvernement pour faire croître l'économie de façon durable et pour que le Canada tire véritablement son épingle du jeu dans l'économie du savoir. La ministre des Sciences peut-elle donc informer cette Chambre des initiatives qu'elle entreprend pour promouvoir la recherche et plus spécifiquement en ce qui a trait à l'Université Laval que j'ai l'immense privilège d'avoir dans Louis-Hébert, mon comté? Merci.
The Honourable Minister of Science.
Monsieur le Président, le programme de chaire de recherche du Canada est l'un des programmes les plus efficaces pour attirer et retenir les chercheurs les plus accomplis et les plus prometteurs du monde. Recently, I announced 305 new and renewed Canada Research Chairs at over 50 post-secondary institutions across Canada, an investment totaling $619 million, including $28 million at Université Laval in my colleague's riding.
The Honourable Member for Abbotsford.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Liberal orgy of spending continues. Canadians want to know how much it costs
to fly, wine, and dine hundreds of the Prime Minister's friends at the Paris Climate Change Conference. New information shows that the Liberal junket will cost taxpayers well over $1 million. Wow. And now the Environment Minister is refusing to divulge exactly who went to Paris with her. She gave us a list of 155 people, but no names attached. So, why the secrecy, and what is the Minister hiding?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for the question. In fact, he should know who was there because I was glad that he was able to join me. I was very pleased by the effective role that Canada played, that we brought members opposite, that we brought Indigenous leaders, that we brought youth, that we brought environmental NGOs, and that, as the U.S. said, the Canadians in Paris were very effective. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Député de Laurier-Sainte-Marie.
Monsieur le Président, selon l'article 48 de la loi sur la radiodiffusion, Radio-Canada n'a pas le droit de vendre d'immeubles d'une valeur de plus de 4 millions de dollars sans avoir l'agrément du gouverneur en conseil. Ce que ça veut dire, c'est que Radio-Canada n'a pas le droit de vendre la tour de Radio-Canada à Montréal sans avoir l'accord du Conseil des ministres. Alors, est-ce que la ministre va enfin prendre ses responsabilités, mettre un frein à la vente de feu de la tour de Radio-Canada et s'assurer que de vraies consultations publiques ont lieu?
La ministre du Patrimoine canadien.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. J'aimerais remercier ma collègue pour sa question. Premièrement, je suis très sensible à l'impact socio-économique que Radio-Canada joue à Montréal et également de la responsabilité historique du gouvernement fédéral dans la région. Encore une fois, je comprends que Radio-Canada, dans toute son indépendance, s'assure de bien évaluer les différents scénarios qui sont présentement sur la table et je souhaite, et comme je l'ai exprimé à plusieurs reprises dans cette Chambre, que justement Radio-Canada puisse travailler de concert avec les employés, les syndicats, les acteurs politiques montréalais et également, en fait, les...
The Honourable Member for Brampton North.
Mr. Speaker, I have consistently heard my constituents in Brampton North speaking of unacceptable wait times and processing of immigration cases, in particular out-of-country spousal reunification. Married individuals are sometimes waiting up to 2 years to reunite and start their lives together. We also see situations of spousal applications where children have been born and still the application remains pending. Can the Minister of Immigration inform this House on what he is doing to help improve the situation for my constituents and all Canadians?
The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
I thank my colleague for this good question, and it is true that over the last 10 years, these Conservatives starved my department of money, diverted resources from families, to the point where it takes an unacceptable 2 years for a husband and wife to be reunited. So we're putting more money in. We're learning from the Syrian experience to do things faster. And first and foremost, my objective is to clean up this big, fat, Conservative mess.
The Honourable Member for Abbotsford.
Well, Mr. Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to try again. A question to the Minister of Environment. I would remind her that had there not been a lone Conservative in Paris at the climate change conference, think of the billions of dollars more that would have been spent on the Prime Minister's foreign vanity projects. And Mr. Speaker, it now appears that mine is the only name that she has disclosed as being part of that delegation to Paris. So again, the question, Mr. Speaker, why is the minister now refusing to tell Canadians exactly how much this Liberal boondoggle...
The Honourable Minister of Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once again, I would like to thank the member opposite for joining our delegation in Paris. It was actually a historic opportunity where we reached an ambitious agreement. Unlike Unlike the party opposite, they didn't believe in working with all sorts of groups. We were there with Indigenous leaders, with business, with environmental NGOs, and members opposite. We worked very, very hard to get an ambitious agreement to tackle climate change, and I'm happy that at least one person on the other side actually believes that climate change is real.
Honorable député de Manicouagan.
Monsieur le Président, le premier budget du présent gouvernement sera déposé dans quelques minutes. Cependant, les signaux émis par celui-ci, notamment lorsque j'ai questionné en cette Chambre la ministre du Commerce international et le ministre des Affaires étrangères, sont plus qu'inquiétants pour l'industrie forestière du Québec. Je rappelle au gouvernement que le Conseil de l'industrie forestière du Québec demande un retour pur et simple au libre-échange avec les États-Unis. Son président, M. André Tremblay, a d'ailleurs sonné l'alarme en affirmant que c'est, et je cite, « le temps ou jamais de faire valoir la situation du Québec, car c'est ni plus ni moins qu'une... »
The Honorable Minister. Honorable Minister of International Trade.
Merci pour la question très longue, mais j'ai pu écouter. Nous avons été clairs depuis le début que cet enjeu constitue une priorité absolue pour ce gouvernement et pour moi personnellement. Je suis heureux d'annoncer que le Premier ministre et le Président ont souligné leur intérêt à l'égard d'une entente à long terme concernant le bois d'œuvre. Pendant notre visite à Washington, notre objectif demeure le maintien d'un accès stable au marché américain pour l'industrie canadienne de bois d'œuvre résineux. Merci.
Monsieur le Président, il y a des répercussions directes du budget fédéral sur d'importants secteurs de l'économie québécoise. Le gouvernement a déjà dit qu'il n'y a rien dans le budget pour venir en aide aux travailleurs d'AVEOS et aux travailleurs de Bombardier. Il refuse de s'engager à accorder aux producteurs laitiers et fromagers des compensations pour leurs pertes suite à l'entente Canada-Europe. Comme les travailleurs des secteurs économiques du Québec seront encore ignorés du budget, doit-on comprendre que les députés québécois du gouvernement n'ont, comme par le passé, que très peu d'influence sur les décisions prises par l'État canadien?
Bravo. Honorable secrétaire parlementaire des Finances.
Merci, mon honorable collègue, pour sa question. Je pense qu'il est vraiment de venir de nous dire qu'on n'a pas consulté. On a consulté les Canadiens partout, Monsieur le Président. Moi-même, qui viens de la Mauricie, on a consulté les gens à Trois-Rivières. Alors, de dire qu'on n'a pas consulté les Québécois et les Québécoises dans le dernier budget, dans le prochain budget plutôt, c'est une hérésie, Monsieur le Président. Et on a écouté l'ensemble des Canadiens parce que ce qu'on s'affaire à faire, Monsieur le Président, c'est de bâtir une économie qui fonctionne pour tous les Canadiens et les Canadiennes d'un océan à l'autre. Et c'est exactement ce qu'on va présenter, Monsieur le Président, dans quelques minutes. Merci.